Giles Dilnot is the editor at Conservative Home. Giles, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you?
Good. Finally, we have you in the parlour of verbal delight. Great to see you again. Indeed, yeah, only took a year. Roughly about the same length of time that Keir Starmer has been in the job, of course. And, you know, we all know there was no honeymoon period, was there, really, for Starmer? And I said at the beginning of the programme, whereas lots of governments come in with, you know, David Cameron's, was it Big Society? Whether it works or not is another issue, but there was a sort of philosophical underpinning. The best one ever, I think, is always going to be Donald Trump's Make America Great Again. Whether you like the man or not, it was a very simple, hugely effective mantra. There was nothing with Keir Starmer, and if there had been something, all it would have said is, we're not the Tories.
And here's the funny thing, Ian. Let's just go back to before the election, because there are two things that are relevant here. First of all, we kept accusing him, and look, I mean, I was in the government that they kicked out, the electorate kicked out in 2024. I was working as a special advisor in that government. I knew we weren't going to win. 14 years, it was inevitable, and we were making mistakes, or we were just not getting to deliver the things that we said we had said we would deliver. But we knew, because we were getting flack from Labour all the time, that they hadn't got any solutions. They may have identified the problems, but we knew they hadn't got any solutions. Now, nobody was listening to us. I don't think I particularly... I mean, I completely understand that, so we weren't getting any traction. If you go back and look at it, it's like we did say they don't have a plan. Yeah. And it turns out they really didn't have a plan. They weren't ready for government. The other thing they did was they came to the electorate and said, these guys are sleazeballs. You know that, and we promise solemnly, because we're the good guys, we're going to be so much better. So they get in, and they get a whopping majority. There's a very thin majority, but they get a whopping majority. And somebody asked me, after they'd been in for a few months, and a lot of this stuff had come out, you know, the Lord Ali suits, the flat lending, the dresses to the misses, and some of this stuff was starting to trickle through. I think we might have had Louise Haigh admitting the fraud charge or whatever. And I said, it doesn't matter. It's not the frocks, it's not the suits, it's not the glasses, it's not the phones. It's hypocrisy that kills you. And so many people have said to us, you know, 14 years, you had 14 years, 14 months to look worse than we did. Yeah. That extraordinary record. And I said to somebody, asked me before Christmas last year on a programme, what are your predictions? Who's in trouble next year? And I said, Keir Starmer is absolutely in trouble. And they looked at me as slightly oddly, as if, you know, that's not the way the story goes. The story goes, okay, if you had a bad fumbling start, you get a reset and you get yourself to grips and you understand the job and it starts to get better. And I said, no, it's not going to happen, because he fundamentally doesn't have what it takes to turn this around. Yeah, and it's he's not up to the job.
Indeed, and the stuff that has happened, I mean, you couldn't put it in an episode of House of Cards.
No,
you know,
they
you
wouldn't
really
believe
could.
you.
And I look at this list as well, Giles, and I'm going to read this again. I know I'm not the first person to do this, but it's too delicious to not repeat again. You lose an anti-corruption minister because she's embroiled in a huge corruption scandal. You lose a homelessness minister because she made some people homeless, and you lose a housing minister because she dodged a housing tax. I mean, really?
It's extraordinary. It's almost like they've gone out of their way to choose the worst possible option of dealing with or their own lives or handling their job in government. And, you know, this is the bit. I'm the editor of Conservative Home. Of course I take a conservative point of view. Of course, I'm looking at and analysing, it's my job, the opposition to a Labour government. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, I could put the rosette aside for a moment and just go, on any scale, on any objective scale, that is incompetence and just weirdness in government that I've never seen before.
I know. I'm just waiting to hear that Shabana Mahmood was part of the Cratewing gang or something. You know, there's going to be something weird and bizarre come up. But I guess, sorry, Giles, do continue.
Ian, there's something else I wanted to share with you and your listeners as well, is that I sort of got two hats. Well, I don't anymore. I am the editor of Conservative Home, but I used to work for James Cleverly in government and was in the Foreign Office. And the Mandelson thing just is really, really odd, because I can't see quite what Downing Street knew on Wednesday evening that they didn't and couldn't have known when he went into PMQs and Starmer said, I've got full confidence in him. It's just not possible. And my former boss did a tweet last night explaining why, if you make a political appointee like Peter Mandelson was, the system is, one, it tends to be on the side of civil servants and career diplomats getting the job, and there are good reasons why they should in many cases. This is a job that has some excellent candidates that would be hoping they would be chosen. But also, that is their job to point out, here is the problem, Minister, with your decision to make a political appointee. And I have no doubt at the very basic level, they would have said, this is a man who has had to leave government twice before. I suspect they would have pointed out more things as well. Due diligence and a process that involves independence, as Starmer talked about. What they mean there is vetting. Right? The idea that some of these issues, which were known about and some in the public domain, were not picked up by vetting is extraordinary. The further thing is that to be the ambassador to the United States from Britain, which is a Five Eyes country, that arguably our biggest and closest and most secure relationship, you would have to have pretty high clearance, higher than I had, and mine was high enough. How people don't know about that, how that information isn't then passed back and go, here is a writ. To me, that is inconceivable of the processes I know operate in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, where I worked for over a year.
And that I was thinking about this because a mutual friend of ours who worked in Downing Street, you'll know who I'm talking about.
I do.
I mean, when he went through the security thing, I remember it was never ending. It went on for months, and all manner of people were spoken to that he'd known back in the... goodness me. And you just described a very similar thing.
I still find people, Ian, who go, oh, you do know I got called 2 years ago. They're thorough. They're thorough. And the point about this, and this is the interesting thing, the point about those vetting things is obviously to ascertain whether you have the capability to keep a secret. And what they're really checking is whether you'll lie. So they know already a lot about you, and they were asking questions they already know the answer to. They just want to know how you're going to answer it. So it's just inconceivable to me that there weren't things raised to say, you're taking a risk, you can still take this risk. And the part of the problem with Mandelson, of course, is he's partly brilliant and partly risky. He's always been like that. You'll find the cabinet secretary back in the days of Blair retrospectively described Peter Mandelson as the most able minister he'd ever come across in government. I'm perfectly prepared to believe that's true. The trouble is that's the attraction to hiring him, and then there's this other stuff.
Exactly. Well, do you know what? I was reminded of this, Giles. There's that clip of Mandelson in the Oval Office when I think the trade deal was done, and he shakes hand with the president, and Trump turns around and says, well, you've got a great accent, you speak, I want to talk like him. And I wonder whether Starmer was just so seduced by the idea that, bearing in mind, I don't for one second think that Trump looks at Starmer and thinks, oh, he's really good, this guy. He kind of tolerates him and he puts on a facade that, they're good mates. He talks a tough deal and stuff. But I think Starmer thought, Mandelson is just the person I need because he'll be very loyal to Trump. He'll be very diplomatic. Trump will like Mandelson. And as we know, there's a bit of commonality there, which we didn't previously.
Might not have wanted raised.
Indeed. But I just genuinely sense that it was... Starmer might have known about a bit of this, but thought he's willing to forego that in exchange for the fact that this is the man that will get the best relationship with Trump.
I am going to show my political geekery here, and also there are dangers of making comparisons to real life and this. But one of the great series is The West Wing on TV, and I have a feeling they sort of see Mandelson as like Lord John Marbury, the guy that goes into.
It's probably exactly that.
I think it is. It's that kind of. He is so quintessentially English, even though it's a bit of a performance. Mandelson is extremely well connected. He comes from a sort of political aristocracy, even though it's not aristocracy. And And he knows a lot of very important people and can hold his own. And like I said, you know, people genuinely saw him, independent people, civil service people, when they worked with him, as a brilliant operative. The problem is he just comes with this baggage.
Yeah.
And at what point do you take a risk? And this is where it comes back to Starmer. Your judgment every single time comes into question. You're not a good judge.
Indeed, and that's central to all of this, of course. And then there's all the other stuff we mentioned, and I talked about the farmer issue and the winter fuel allowance, and Boomerang Rach and her CV of doom, and Reynolds and his solicitor status, etc. There's all of that. But in terms of scandals, Giles, look, you look back at 1997 when Blair came in, that was also meant to be a sort of clean sweep, and obviously the major government had been embroiled in all sorts, and some of them had either been in jail or were waiting to go to jail, goodness knows what else. So Blair comes in and you think, how long is it going to take? I think I remember the Bernie Ecclestone affair, and there was somebody else caught with their trousers down on Clapham Common. So there's always a scandal that comes at some point.
But there's a really interesting thing about handling, and this is why Starmer is no Blair. And, I think it's unworthy of Conservatives not to recognise that whether you agreed with a single thing he did, and I can criticise lots of things that he did, that Blair did feel like someone who walked the walk and talked the talk of being a Prime Minister. And Starmer is not that man. Yeah. And here's why. The first scandal that hits Tony Blair in this, by the way, I think it's in the autumn of 97, his approval rating is like in, Soviet election figures.
Correct.
It's in the 80s or something. It's off the charts. And he has this scandal, and he gives an interview to Robin Oakley, who is the then BBC political editor. The usual chairs, two cameras, it's a crisis kind of thing. And he looks at Robin Oakley and he goes, "I think people understand that I am a pretty straightforward kind of guy, and we've made a mistake." And he just owned it and said sorry.
Yeah.
Right? First thing that happens to Starmer, he obfuscates, he seems to give the impression that it's not nearly as bad as... If you're trying to pin this as like stuff the Tories did, well, it isn't. And I thought, you're misjudging this, you're tin-eared about this. I wouldn't do that. I'd go, do you know what? It was a mistake, shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
You might have had a bit more of hearing just coming in. And that is the difference between them, that he's not a communicator, he doesn't find it easy to say sorry he made a mistake, which is a problem when you're making this many mistakes this quickly.
Final question, Giles. We'll have to be brief on this if we can, but will Starmer hang on till 2029?
I don't think he will, no. That's been my prediction for a while. I don't think he will. I think... and also, the trouble is, the blame circle's getting closer and closer to him. I think they will try and move on him. Although, having said that, very briefly, Labour Party, its constitution and it's the way it works, it's quite difficult to get rid of a sitting leader. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Giles, thank you very much indeed. Full house points, by the way, for the Tony Blair impression. Wasn't expecting that. That was a beauty. He is Giles Dilnot, editor at Conservative Home, former senior government advisor as well.